exploited civilians. Museveni soldiers bombed hundreds of thousands of people out of their villages, attacking everybody left and right. Some of the officers who served in Ugandan army, Museveni bombed hundreds, thousands of Africans out of the village. Uh, so you also heard of Joseph Kony and the Lord of Resistance. There was a video made by some NGO funded by the United States, watched by millions of people. And we were told Joseph Kony is a bad guy and Museveni is the good guy. Nobody talks about Joseph Kony now. All of a sudden, what we hear now is what? ADF, 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 ADF. You don't hear about Lord Resistance Army or Joseph Kony. But what they don't tell you is that most of the killings you heard being done in northern Uganda was done by Museveni's army. They've on Joseph Kony. I'm not saying Joseph Kony is a good guy. No, he's a killer. We know that. But most of the killings, he's been murdered by taking of things like that, all these mutilations, all these terrible, terrible killings that took place in Northern Uganda. The Acholi people, the Longi people, they all suffered in that process. Museveni's army did it. The troops of Museveni did it. Just like England. We have the Ugandan proxy group in the Congo. We have the Rwanda of Kagame proxy war groups in the Congo. They are the ADF. They are the ADF. People are looking for the ADF. We are told there are 600, maybe just 1,000. We've got over 20,000 UN troops in the Congo. We have the Rwandan army in the Congo, in their own name or through proxy militia groups there. We have the Museveni army in the Congo through proxy groups of all kinds. So you're going to tell the world, and you also have the Congolese army, which is dominated by the Rwandan army, that was part of the deal for Kagame and Kagame. You have to introduce the Rwandan officers inside the Congolese army, which means you have a Congolese army that cannot fight. All these proxy groups funded, supported directly. This is documented from Rwanda or Uganda, like the M23. You all heard about M23. You all heard about Laurent Kunda, all these groups. So the Congolese army cannot fight them because most of the officers are from Rwandan army in the first place. And the UN army is not there to fight for the liberation of Africa. We have the UN armies in the Congo, in Somalia, in Sudan, in Mali, in Central Africa Republic. We have them all over the places. They're not there to fight for the liberation of Africa. They are there to facilitate the looting of Africa. The UN peace is a colonial peace. It's a peace that maintains the status. You see, so you're looking for the area. When you hear the Rwandan armies in the Congo, Ugandan armies in the Congo, when you hear of the militia groups run from Kampala or run from Uganda, you're looking at the ADF yourself. EDF, what is EDF? What is the program? What is the basics? What's the social basis? Where do they recruit from? Who are the leaders? You don't have no information on that. The only thing they tell you, they're affiliated to jihadist group ISIS and something like that. You can't tell the world that UN, MONUSCO army, Rwandan army, Congolese army, Ugandan army cannot end bad guy, and Museveni is the good guy. Nobody talks about Joseph Kony now. All of a sudden, over here now is what? ADF, 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 ADF. You don't hear about Lord Resistance Army or Resistance Army. But what they don't tell you is that most of the killings you heard being done in northern Uganda was done by Museveni's army. They blame it on Joseph Kony. I'm not saying Joseph Kony is a good guy. No, he's a killer. We know that. But most of the killings, we've been murdered by machetes and things like that. All these mutilation, all these terrible, terrible killings that took place in northern Uganda. The actually people, the Longi people, they all suffered in that process. Museveni's army did it. The troops of Museveni did it. Kill the Africans in those part of Uganda, and they blame on Joseph Kony. Just like in the Congo, you're looking for ADF. Don't look for ADF anyway. We have the Ugandan proxy group in the Congo. We have the Rwanda of Kagame proxy groups in the Congo. They are the ADF. They are the ADF. People looking for the ADF. We are told there are 600, maybe just 1,000. We've got over 20,000 UN troops in the Congo. We have the Rwandan army in the Congo, in their own name or through proxy militia groups. We have the Museveni army in the Congo through proxy groups of all kinds. So you're going to tell the world. And you also have the Congolese army, which is dominated by the Rwandan officers, that was part of the deal for Kagame not to make war in the Congo between Joseph Kabila and Kagame. You have to introduce the Rwandan officers inside the Congolese army, which means you have a Congolese army that cannot fight.
Looking on the interstate, I'm dealing with them bricks. Cooking with the flour, hit me if you need a fish. Bottom of the night, chop slow, that's the ball game. You talking and I barely ever miss. Sugar by my sugar by my sugar by my sugar by my no degree within my thing culinary. Either that or couldn't hit them causing hoop. Creep up on them with them hammers, we gon' never keep my pistol smoking like we can't shoot. He ain't trying to lock me up, shot with the smoke, tell me, Merry Christmas, but it got the Santa Claus, send it through your roof. Catching you, you're hanging around the trap, you need to buy some. I'ma do the chicken dance and fly when them pies come. Pull up to the dock and pop the fee up on the boat. Guarantee less than the kid, get you smoke. When that money coming, you and some your niggas fall out. Hate it when you pull up to the venue with the cars out. All my diamonds, Blu-ray jeweler got me on some notes. Ain't them killers with me, down the shooting with no hope. Booking on the interstate, I'm dealing with them bricks. Cooking with the flour, hit me if you need a fish. Bottom of the night, chop slow, that's the ball game. So you talking and I barely ever miss. Shoot up on my shoot up on my Sugar by my sugar by my
yeah, that's how my dope house came from. Montega Jada, where you think I got the name from? Raised round the junkies, where you think I got my game from? Soon as the love stopped, that's when the pain comes. We ain't selling bundles either, we just moving big shit. Try to disappear with some work, get your wig split. You try to find a vein or you can switch. Get it on the arm, but I need a little interest. Now you can't live with us, we don't want no visitors. People call us drug dealers, I say we distributors. Haters won't hate, cause we keep making them sick of us. Keep making it hot, they gon' think about evicting us.
Looking on the interstate, I'm bailing with them bricks. Cooking with the flour, hit me if you need the pitch. Bottom of the night, chops loaded, that's the ball game. You a target and I barely ever miss. Sugar by my sugar by my sugar by my sugar by my
All right, let's go to that all important time of the show. Once again, my favorite part of the show. Woo yeah! Fire in the booth. And tonight we got something for you, man. I'm excited big. I'm excited about this one, you know. I got a feeling about this one. Who's the man of the house? It's about to be, son.
Let's get it, nigga.
You know what time it is when you hear this, right?
Buffalo, stand up. Almighty. Big yes.
You already fucking know, man. Told y'all niggas y'all gotta fucking rap, man. Eastside Buffalo shit, Westside, man. Fucking fly guy, man. What was she gonna do? Rest in peace, man.
Mother, you gonna dig this.
Put on my shoes now, my hammer was first. Bulletproof the whip I used to take my grandma to church. I went gram for gram with the work, hand in hand on the first. Everybody who hating now was a fan of us first. Hey look, underdog what? What you wanna do? Let's put 100 more up, nigga. The summer all us. I'm in 2 whips, one a Tahoe, one a tour bus. Got so many straps with us, we could start a war up. It's a real safe hazard if we still gay traffic. Show where that money coming from. Still pay taxes. The IRS coming, and they still pay faster. Start a business in a building that you still make racks in. I learned from my losses, strikes I earned from the bosses. Whipping deuces, till the hoopies turned into Porsches. I couldn't name off the lies. I heard bitches talking, now she mine. I sent a text back, we heard bitches stalking. You gotta be careful, these hoes think they fancy. I just want my dick sucked. She wanna start a family. She average, get them taxes and go to Miami. But with this kind of status, I'm probably going to the Grammys. I know niggas hate me. I came out the trenches on some new shit, but some ways I invented. Yeah, PayPal and credit. Send that cake when you get it. This the real definition. How you stay down and get it. Yeah, I'm the next Nas. They judge us all still. Got your bitch in the middle, Times Square, Laura Hill. Told her my phone was dead. She wrote a number for the bill. Off white paint on my jacket, look like a spill. Played last year, but watch the price shoot up. All black, my entourage dressed just like shooters. You spend your life on us. Me, I give a night to her. Trey told these bitches they don't gotta be nice to us. 1,000 grams on the plate, that's what my purpose was. So I had interviews with Connects, not the Breakfast Club facts. He told me 26, it was 30 before that. I hurried to score that. He was 30 before rap, nigga. Shit, nigga. Yeah, let me fix my motherfucking jewels. Catch my jewels. Fix your furniture. I just bought a new 450 from my man. Just came from Atlanta, Trump for. He just got back from the road trip. Gave me 2 cartridges, box of bullets for 1 clip. He said you better buy a couple more. They're gonna be so quick. I said, my nigga, when you slide, no. Cause I'ma do this jokes tonight, and I'm back tomorrow to buy them all. I took a loss, but now I'm back buying raw. Selling for the shack, but I get it for the Brian Shaw. Letting off his neck, but you niggas trying to climb a wall. I put the pressure on your shooters like Kawhi the Claw. law. And every verse I'm applying more. Heard 6ix9ine testifying, I ain't surprised at all. Walk-ups, my nigga, we ain't driving by. I brought Fleet with me and he been down the slide. My nigga did 12 years for letting iron fly. Left when he was 16, he came home Zion side. My doctor mad that I wouldn't let him operate. I bounced back and I just made more money than my doctor made. Violating you, getting the surgeon and the doctor. So like the helicopter and all the noise my child make. Asking if it's a problem, they won't answer me back. I co-signed Portland, Carmelo Anthony back. Really just came to see my plug. I go hand in the sack. I'm smiling like Anderson back when he hand me the packs. My nigga pull up in a gray station. Hop out, fake A6, hopefully you're gonna be rich. You just gotta stay patient. My bitch looking like a youngster Nate Lathan. Sitting ringside watching Tank Davis. Johnny Dang chain bracelet. Niggas mad cause I'm eating and they can't take it. About to drop my album and the impact on Shake Pavement. If the slugs for rooms pull up with K's waving. A lot of bullets thrown like when Brady played Peyton. Rock up designer to my drawers, nigga sliding to the mall. When they ain't finding this DR, nigga. We was in the trenches selling China by the store. Window watcher in the trap, Mac 90 by the door. In Houston, riding down West Side in the car. That cost more than what you signed for. Admire from the far. If you niggas run up on me, then I'm fire in this raw. Chopper set you fuck niggas on fire. I'm the god. That's why niggas not shit. That's why niggas can't fuck with the game, man. Yeah, what was shit gonna do? Out of now, you smoke every sword now. Now you I went in. That was sorry, that was Wouse.
Hold on. Yo, it's Black No Cap Zone. Black No Cap Zone. We about to get started. My name is Diop Olubella. I'm a member, proud member of the Black Community Control of Police Working Group for the Black is Back Coalition. And today we're going to be dealing with the topic of today's discussion is on the question of I don't even want to say horizontal violence because it goes much deeper than just horizontal violence. Because we're talking about colonial violence, and that is not the same thing as such, because colonial violence also includes the violence that comes down on Black people from the state itself. And so with that said, we actually we themed this particular session in colonial violence. Point your guns at the state. Black community control of police now. And we're gonna be, I gotta get a little comfortable. I don't feel comfortable right now, to be honest with you, because this is an important discussion, and I want to make sure that we do it correctly, you know? So, we're going to be talking about that, and really, this is a response. In fact, the subhead for this particular thing says an African internationalist response to Philadelphia's so-called war on gun violence. So, we are, because this discussion, again, it's to really set the record straight in terms of what the basis of violence going on in the city of Philadelphia and throughout the country, where they say it's a spike in gun violence, right? So we're going to talk about that, comrades. And before we do, I want to salute the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement under the heroic leadership of Columbai Andernet on their victory that they had today in court in San Diego, California, where brother, I want to make sure I get his name right, Denzel Drawn was just, he just got off, he beat the charges. And I want to read, I want to make sure I'm putting this out correctly, because this is a really important victory where across the country there's been all types of resistance and protests being waged by the Black community. And so NPDOM's participation in that resistance and successful struggle over the state in this court trial is very significant, because that's a victory for the revolution itself. So we want to talk about that. And again, we want to salute NPDOM, congratulate NPDOM on this important victory. And also, I wanted just to say, we started this session with, we played Secretary General of the African Socialist International, Louise Kinshasa. who gave a really important presentation. He makes a presentation every Saturday morning at 7 o'clock Eastern. I'm not sure what time that is in other time zones, but I know it comes on every Saturday morning at 7 o'clock a.m. Eastern. And I try my best to watch it at the actual time as it's being streamed. And this particular presentation that I just played was from last week, and is dealing with the many forms of proxy war and colonial violence that U.S. imperialism is waging against our people throughout the continent of Africa. So, and we're going to be quoting some of Louise's presentation in this particular discussion. And then after that, we played this cat named Chinks, who is an artist. I believe he's from Queens or something. I don't know, somewhere in New York. But Chinks was really important. This particular track was called "Fuck About My My Dope House" or Trap House. I'm not sure which one it is because I played the edited version. But you know, we have made presentations a couple of weeks ago addressing the question of the illegitimate colonial capitalist drug economy that the U.S. government imposed on the African community. And the song that I just played, essentially it is a song that can be, or it's a slogan or demand that can be applied to the police military occupation of the African community itself. And we say the police need to get about the trap house and to get about of our community as a whole. And at the same time, we say that we don't say that as a means of justifying or facilitating criminal activity at all, because there's such a thing as the U.S. government's chemical warfare on the African community that resulted in the funneling of crack cocaine into our communities, which again represents chemical warfare on our community. And so we condemn that, even as it is participated in by sectors of our own community. And part of the task of the revolution is to win the people away from that activity, which facilitates the counterinsurgent objectives of the U.S. colonial capitalist state. And so even as we demand the immediate withdrawal of the police from the trap and the oppressed and exploited Black community as a whole, we do so as we struggle to build a new society and to transform the conditions in our community itself, so that if there is such a thing as a trap, it is an institution in our community that distributes medicinal substances that benefit the material interests of the African community. So we're going to talk about that later on in further discussions. But I feel like that's a really important song, and the hook itself gives us the ability to unite with the particular demand that comes from broad sectors of the community for the police to get out of the community. And at the same time, we have responsibility to infuse revolutionary analysis and some form of leadership that would help the people transform our conditions, including our health itself. So, and we've had discussions about this in the past. And so I just want to say those things. But again, today's topic is end colonial violence. Point your guns at the state. Black community control of the police now. So this was written this last week as the discussion around the so-called gun violence throughout the U.S. is escalating. And and we don't want for the U.S. imperialist ruling class to lead in the discussion on how the community and the population as a whole should respond to this phenomenon of violence, right? So we want to intervene in this entire discussion in a way that exposes the colonial state itself as the primary source of all violence in society today. And not only that, but to win the people to the organized struggle to end the military occupation of our community, which we believe will end violence. So we want to deepen that through this particular presentation that we prepared for y'all. So this year, Philadelphia has experienced record numbers related to shootings. And I'm running off some statistics right now. 521 killings by gun as of this Monday. up 12% from 2020, according to NBC Philly. 83% of those killed were African. And that's important to note because essentially gun violence and gun crime almost always revolves around the African community. Based on the universal nature, and that's important to say. We're saying that even though we're talking about Philadelphia, where it has been confirmed that 83% of those that was killed by so-called gun violence, it is safe to say that that same proportion is spread across the board in every major city where so-called gun violence is increasing. It is safe to say that the same proportion of victims of so-called gun violence are African in these areas as well. And that's because, and this is important to say, because there's nothing unique about the conditions in any African community, oppressed African community, anywhere on the planet Earth or within U.S. borders. You go from one ghetto to the next and you see the same conditions and the same colonial oppression. So that's important for us to recognize. So based on the universal nature of colonial conditions Africans experience everywhere in the U.S., it is likely that Africans not only make up 83% of killings in Philadelphia, but nationwide as well. FBI reports fatal shootings are up 30% from last year nationwide. Quote, the gun, and this is all taken from an article in the Philadelphia Inquirer. That's important to note as well. And there's a quote in that same article that says, the Gun Violence Archive, a nonprofit database that tracks gun violence across the country, said nationwide more than 17,000 people have died this year as a result of gunshots, not including suicides, and more than 4,000 people have been injured. Philadelphia police say they are on track to seize 6,000 guns this year. And that's important as well because it speaks to what the pigs have been up to in the last period, right? Because they didn't just, those guns did not just fall in the police's lap, right? The police acquired or seized these guns as a consequence of the same stop and frisk and other so-called proactive policing that they claim that they stopped doing. So, however, what is more important to note is that all these stats come from white imperialist media. So, as always, you have to take it with a grain of salt. And that's important to say. We're going to say why, because they be lying, y'all. And it's important to make this disclaimer that I'm not necessarily one to the idea that there has been over 500 shootings and killings in the city of Philadelphia this year. And like we say every week, what I report to you comes straight from the reports from bourgeois media. We at this particular time do not have the capacity to really catalog every shooting and killing that happens in any given community at this particular moment. And that's not just in the US, but around the world. So much of our information about the objective conditions that the people face comes from, imperialist media, and when we're lucky, from revolutionary media, but primarily from institutions like the New York Times and ABC and, et cetera, et cetera. So we extract from these imperialist media sources vital empirical data that helps us construct a particular analysis on what the fuck really going on in our community and how we move on it. But again, we recognize that at any given time they could be lying. So with that said, I say that assuming that these numbers are accurate, this is how we understand the question. White power has a deep interest in criminalizing the African working class. And it's no secret that it uses fake news and distortion of facts to advance its counterinsurgent objectives. Counterinsurgency is a form of warfare waged by an oppressing nation's state apparatus against the population it oppresses, at the point that the oppressed population engages in resistance, or what they refer to as insurgency. So, you heard, like, for example, when Afghanistan, when the Taliban was engaged in resistance against the U.S. government, or even in Iraq, right? But when the Taliban was fighting the U.S. military on their land to claim control over their land, the U.S. government and military referred to the Taliban and the resistance fighters as insurgents. And essentially, insurgency is what we actually define it in here. So counterinsurgency is a form of warfare by an oppressive nation's state apparatus against the population it oppresses. At that point, that the oppressed population engages in resistance, or what they refer to as insurgency. Black people in the US and worldwide constitute an oppressed African nation under the foreign political domination and economic exploitation by the white oppressor nation, headquartered in Europe and North America. In the 1960s, the US government waged a counterinsurgency against the Black Power Revolution that was primarily centered in the Black Panther Party, who wanted self-government and independent political power for Black people in the US and oppressed people worldwide. And it's important for me to say that I'm a member of the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations. And Black is Back is chaired by Omali Yeshitela, who is also the chairman and the founder of the African People's Socialist Party. And the party is literally the only revolutionary organization that survived the vicious US government counterinsurgency that was waged against not just the Black Panther Party, but all of the revolutionary organizational leadership in the Black community during the 1960s, where essentially there was a genuine revolutionary movement on the ground. So unlike other organizations like the Panthers, which were literally militarily crushed and defeated by the US colonial state, the party survived the counterinsurgency, and in doing so was able to sum up the present and the current conditions that the revolution and the community as a whole faced every period of struggle from the 60s until now. And the existence of the Black is Back Coalition is a result of the work of the party and the party's understanding of the need to rebuild and complete the Black Power Revolution of the 1960s. Because the party is not the only organization that has some type of relationship with the struggle of the 60s. Other members of the Black is Back Coalition have a relationship with the struggle in the 60s. In fact, some members and allies of the coalition are former members of the Black Panthers and other disparate organizers and forces that love the revolution and are loyal to the revolution, but have been stripped of organization until the Black is Back Coalition gave them the ability to achieve a certain type of organizational relationship with other forces that have that same relationship and loyalty to the revolution of the 60s. So the Black community control the police work and the demand itself is something that was put forth, that was initiated by the African People's Socialist Party and the Black is Back Coalition, precisely because they understand and understood all along that the critical question is not about reforming the police and finding ways to disguise the colonial oppression that the police facilitate, but to win power in the hands of the community. So that's what the Black is Back Coalition and BCCP it represents. And that's what I'm a part of, right? And so I want to read this paragraph again. In the 1960s, the US government waged a counterinsurgency against the Black Power Revolution that was primarily centered in the Black Panther Party, who wanted self-government and an independent political power for Black people in the US and oppressed people worldwide. Guns were not enough to defeat the revolutionary ideas that the Panthers and organizations like it had spread. Ideas which inspired the masses of African workers inside US borders and beyond to organize for liberation and go beyond the limited demands imposed on us by sellout leadership within the civil rights movement. So, again, because you had, a civil rights movement, and we don't have enough time to go into the historic conditions that gave birth to the civil rights movement, but in the final analysis, the civil rights movement was a limited revolution that actually was led by imperialism itself in alliance with the liberal sector of the African petty bourgeoisie or middle class, who only wanted to integrate into the colonial capitalist system and only struggle for demands that would facilitate the ability of the petty bourgeoisie to do so, but sacrifice the interests and the demands of the workers. So even though, as a consequence of the civil rights movement, Black people supposedly have the right to vote, and Black people have the right to run for office and occupy other petty bourgeois occupations in colonial capitalist society, the workers, the masses, as you can see in any ghetto in the country, the conditions have not improved at all. In fact, the rate of exploitation of the African working class has intensified since the Black Power Revolution of the 1960s, and that is part of what the prison system represents, where subsequent following 1972 until the year 2000, over 2 million Black people have been stuffed in the prisons, forced to work for free, and also creating an entire economy for the general white population at the expense of our own freedom. So, and the civil rights movement did not have an answer for that because it does not have the ability to struggle for power, independent power, and self-determination. So, but we do. And this is where we're coming from. So in addition to assassinations and jailings, and this all ties back to the question of the gun and the so-called gun violence, which we're going to clarify that definition later on. In addition to assassinations and jailings of revolutionary leaders, the colonial state implemented other tactics of counterinsurgency. It used every resource at its disposal, from postal service to education system to the media itself. In an article it published in December 2019, entitled Chairman Amali Yeshitela and the African People's Socialist Party, the burnerspear.com says, quote, a people under counterinsurgency means every African parent lives in dread of what could happen to their children at the hands of the killer cops. And we just saw the trial of Ahmaud Arbery. And now we're seeing the trial around Dante, I'm sorry, I forget brother Dante's, what's Dante's last name? But the brother in Brooklyn Park that was killed by the police. And, you know, they're not the only ones. These are trials that the imperialist media presents to you as evidence of its ability for the colonial system to, you know, correct its mistakes. And so far, when you look at the testimonies and whatnot, well, we'll see how that thing plays out. But whether the pig is found guilty or not, just like the crackers that killed Ahmaud, you know what I'm saying? It doesn't matter, because for every one cop or rogue cracker, so to speak, that kills an African, there's 1,000 that you don't even hear about. And therefore, there's no real political pressure on the system to do anything about. So, and we know that the fact that there's another 1,000 is evident of a system. It's not like an isolated incident, but this is a pattern that we're looking at. And therefore, you have to recognize that it's a system that's responsible for the ongoing violence that Black people experience in this country, in colonial capitalist society. So the counterinsurgency includes the endless slander on TV and newspapers, movies, and shows, demonizing, criminalizing, and vilifying African people on every front, unquote. Yeah, the white imperialist media, NBC, CBS, CNN, etc., has historically functioned as an instrument of counterinsurgency, and its activities have always served to shape public opinion to advance the strategic interests of the colonial capitalist state and system as a whole. And I want to say this, y'all, because this is a social media thing I'm doing right now. Black No Cop Zone is a broadcast that we do in front of a camera, and the primary audience is not the community that I'm in right now, but those of you who are watching on TV. And the fact is that what the pigs is doing right now, which they know what we're doing right now, and they organize themselves to flash their lights and impose their presence on us right now as we do this broadcast, but they do it all the time any damn way. But they do so also to say to the world that they are here. And the reality is that we are speaking to a social media audience primarily when we do Black No Cop Zone. Some of that audience lives in this neighborhood that I'm in North Philly. Some of it lives in Congo and other places throughout the African world. I don't know. But we do that for this reason. We do this for social media so that people around the world can participate in this particular form of political education. But that's not all we do. As Black community control of the police, even as we speak in the city of Philadelphia, we have forces that are moving amongst the people and organizing as we speak. So I want to be clear that this is not all we do. And in fact, the purpose of what we do on this damn social media is to attract forces from throughout the world where we cannot hand out flyers physically right now to take up the call to do that work where they are located. And the only way that we can get in touch with those forces is at this particular moment through the social media. And maybe you know somebody that lives somewhere else and knows people over there and shit like that. But the point is that as long as social media is available to us, then we're going to use it, right? But again, that does not mean that it is all we do. That's why we got the Burn and Spear newspaper, you know what I'm saying? Which is the official political organ of the African People's Socialist Party. And we have other print media. And it's important to say that because there's, been times, many times during periods of mass resistance where the government in places like London, where there was rebellions that rocked the whole city, and Algeria and Egypt, and other fronts of massive resistance where the colonial state, literally St. Petersburg, Florida, where the state literally shut down the internet to undermine the ability of the people to communicate with each other within one particular city, or more importantly, with Africans in other cities and countries. So we understand that at any given time, they can take social media away from us. And that is why it is critical that we have the capacity to produce our own media that they cannot shut down because we control it. And that's primarily done through print media, not only through the newspaper, but through producing newsletters and flyers and leaflets on our own. So that's important to say as well. But as I continue, so in addition to assassinations and jailings of revolutionary leaders, the colonial state implemented other tactics of counterinsurgency. It used in fact, we read that. So, the white imperialist media, NBC, CBS, CNN, has historically functioned as an instrument of counterinsurgency, and its activities have always served to shape public opinion to advance the strategic interests of the colonial capitalist state and system as a whole. In the 1980s and early 90s, during the height of the counterinsurgent chemical warfare in the form of the crack cocaine industry, the media won support from the white population and even sectors of the African petty bourgeoisie and working class itself, with the public policy of police containment under the guise of the war on drugs, war on violence, etc. Y'all know, because there's people in your own neighborhood who perhaps be like, well, if you don't got the cops, then how you gonna stop the killings and the violence and and this is the line that the state runs through its media and other institutions all the time. And it ends up even penetrating the consciousness of some sectors of the African community itself. So the archetypical figure blamed for the drug problem was the African working class. The state's line was, quote, to get rid of the drugs, we must lock up the drug dealers. And to lock up the drug dealers, you must put police in their neighborhood and harass all the people until you find one selling drugs. Right? That's the line. That's the justification that they use for their presence in the community. But the reality is that their presence really represents military occupation, and we'll explain why. So the result of this campaign is, quote, 1 out of every 8 people in prison in the entire world is an African person in this country. A fact revealed in the same article on the burningspear.com. In fact, the U.S. crime bill that was drafted in 1996 by your president, right, white people, your president, Joseph Biden, the Democratic Party united with it across the board when it was up for vote. It's not like Joe Biden was the only one, but Bill Clinton was the president at the time that the crime bill was passed. And the only way that the crime bill was passed, it wasn't just like a discussion that Joe Biden and Bill Clinton had, but they had a vote in Congress and Senate or whatever, where they all had to unite with it. And the vote of approval for the U.S. crime bill was overwhelming. And you might be surprised by who supported that in terms of some of these Negro politicians as well. But anyway, so the U.S. crime bill resulted in the deployment of 150,000 police forces into the ghettos and barrios of North America. The crime bill was a response to what the president at the time, Bill Clinton, called the super predators. Y'all heard that, you know what I'm saying? Anyway, and some of our forces, we stepped to Bill Clinton when he came through to campaign for Barack Obama during the presidential campaign where he was running against somebody. But anyway, it took more than 2 decades. Was it for Barack Obama or whoever Trump was running against? Who was that he was running against? But anyway, it took more than 2 decades later for it to be accepted by sectors of ruling class media that the U.S. government itself was the primary orchestrator of the presence of crack cocaine in U.S. cities. And actually, the weed question is not much different, where yesterday, weed, people, Africans selling weed was the worst thing on the planet, the villain, right? But now weed is legal and shit, right? And it's a similar phenomenon, but it's even worse with the crack thing. So it took more than 2 decades, 20 years later, for it to be accepted by just some sectors of ruling class media that the U.S. government itself was the primary orchestrator of the presence of crack cocaine in U.S. cities. A New York Times article published in 2014 opens with these 2 paragraphs, quote, "If someone told you today that there was strong evidence that the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, once turned a blind eye to accusations of drug dealing by operatives it worked with, it might ring some distant, skeptical bell." Did that really happen? That really happened as part of their insurgency against the Sandinista government in Nicaragua. Some of the CIA-backed Contras made money through drug smuggling transgressions noted in a little noticed 1988 Senate subcommittee report. So, you know, and it's more than just the CIA turning a blind eye, but the U.S. government coordinated the crack cocaine industry. They didn't just turn a blind eye to some, you know, rogue cops over there that were rogue soldiers that was doing bad things. No, the highest levels of the U.S. government, George Bush himself, who was the president, had vested interest in the distribution of crack cocaine throughout. It couldn't have happened any other way, because if it was just a couple of so-called bad army forces or whatever, then how the hell did they organize this distribution network throughout the country? You know what I'm saying? So we'll talk about that. But this narrative rebukes the previous narrative that it was the black community that was responsible for the drug economy. So we caught them lying. You know, this is a clear contradiction. In 1989, it was black people that was responsible for crack. But now in the year 2000, this came out in 2014, now they're admitting that the U.S. government was the one that facilitated that entire process. So if they can lie like that, in fact, if they can, like your chairman said, they can sell you and they can sell your mama into slavery, then why do you think they would not goddamn sell and pump crack cocaine into your community? That's real shit. So it's media. If the media and courts and police can lie about the source of drugs in the black community, then why should we believe the stories that they tell about all the killings that are reportedly taking place right now? As president of the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement, Columbai Andanet declared in a recent broadcast, quote, "The black community is good. Our young people are worth it," unquote. Black community control of police unites with this statement. This is not to say that violence does not occur within the black community and that black people are not shot and killed every day, often by other black people. However, the media does not expose the role, the primary and leading role that the U.S. colonial state plays in such violence, nor does it offer up a solution that speaks to the interests of black people in ending the violence that we suffer from. Instead, ruling class media is used as a mouthpiece for the colonial state. Each news story about a shooting ends with the reporter encouraging, it ends with the reporter always saying, if you have any information about the shooting, then make sure you contact law enforcement. That's what they always say, which it reveals the relationship that the media has with the police and the colonial state itself. But this is the thing, y'all. It's impossible to be opposed to violence against black people and be for the police at the same time. It's impossible, right? So we know that the imperialist media is not only lying, but it manipulates information and it uses its platform and influence as a way to run the state's line and to justify the activities of the colonial state and our community and the society as a whole. The police function as a standing army to protect the system of colonial capitalism, responsible for killing at least 2 Africans every day in this country alone. The police do that, right? This does not even include the millions of Africans on the continent of Africa and elsewhere who died as a consequence of US-backed proxy wars in places like Congo, Ethiopia, and Sierra Leone. Secretary General of the African Socialist International, Louis Kinshasa, summed up during his Africa Must Unite weekly broadcast, quote, "We saw in 1994 the United States and France go to war through proxy militaries. The US stopped respecting the colonial territories in Africa once claimed by the French. War erupted in Rwanda based on this conflict. We never had seen such atrocities, mutilated African bodies in that fashion. The media told us it was the Hutus versus the Tutsis in Rwanda, irrational tribal violence. And we all felt demoralized when we saw those images. But this was a war being fought between the French and the US. The US had the Rwanda Patriotic Front, or RPF, and the RPF came from Uganda, which was led by Museveni. But you never heard about this in the media. You never heard about the Ugandan army or Museveni's role. All you heard was Hutus and Tutsis killing each other. Kagame and all the petty bourgeois African Tutsi leaders came from the Ugandan army. They were in power in Uganda and they wanted power in Rwanda. The United States armed Uganda and Museveni, who then armed the Kagame, Paul Kagame, and the RPF. This, unquote, this proxy war in Rwanda resulted in millions of Africans killed before it even spread to Congo. Secretary General Louisi deepens our criticism of Museveni and the neo-colonial Ugandan military's role in protecting US and British interests throughout sub-Saharan Africa, citing an article written by Ellen Epstein for the New York Review. Quote, Museveni's security forces are among the most brutal and violent in the world. They have tortured legislators and killed opposition supporters. They have gunned down unarmed villagers and sparked conflicts in neighboring countries. Museveni has long been one of the Pentagon's closest partners in sub-Saharan Africa. In the early 1990s, he funneled the US weapons to Sudanese rebels fighting the Islamicist-dominated government of Omar al-Bashir. Today, the US relies on Museveni's forces to fight al-Shabaab militants in Somalia. They also serve as guards under US command in Iraq. In return, Museveni has received tens of billions of dollars in foreign assistance from the US, UK, European Union, and other white imperialist donors. African internationalist leadership, such as that which Secretary General Louisi provided, enables Africans and the world to understand the war in Rwanda and other violent struggles within the African nation as proxy wars fought in the interests of US imperialism. And this is important to say because we never talk about contradictions and struggles that any sector of the African population, the international African community experiences like it's some kind of isolated situation. We always discuss and analyze the struggles and the violence that we experience in the context of an international colonial capitalist system that oppresses all of us no matter where we are on the planet Earth. And that's important to understand because the only way that we're going to be free in the US or anywhere else as African people is through the unification and liberation of Africa. And that struggle must be led by the African working class if it is to end the exploitation that we experience by not only white capitalists, but the Negro capitalists that are right behind the white capitalists and can't wait to take its place in terms of becoming the new oppressors and exploiters of the African working class. So it's important that we always discuss these struggles in the context of an international situation. So African internationalist leadership, such as that which Secretary General Louazy provided, enables Africans in the world to understand the war in Rwanda and other violent struggles within the African nation as proxy wars fought in the interest of U.S. imperialism. And this also speaks to the strategic importance that the domestically colonized African working class within U.S. borders has in terms of bringing down the belly or the beast from within its own belly, right? The same monster that's attacking and killing our people in Rwanda is headquartered down the street from where we at right now. So that's important to understand as well. And that's why they are so frantic about the question of not black people dying from gun violence, but black people having guns. That's the real question that the local colonial state, the police, the DA, and every other representative of U.S. imperialism is concerned about the armed capacity of the African working class. And that's the real reason why, if they do anything about so-called black on black violence, it is based on their need to disarm the black community. The police function as an occupying army, standing army to protect the system of colonialist-capitalism, responsible for killing. Okay, we said that, my bad. So the fate of those millions of Africans murdered in Rwanda and Congo, and those being killed in Ethiopia today, along with the 17,000 Africans in the U.S. who were killed this year by so-called gun violence, was determined by the circumstances created by colonialist capitalism, a system in which African workers worldwide are denied the right to control the wealth we produce, and government to enforce economic policy we set for ourselves and all other forces internationally. And here go these cracker ass pigs fucking around again. Hey, yo! Y'all know what it is, man. I'm not gonna catch no charges throwing some shit at the police for what. But yo, this is representative of the struggle that we are faced with right now. And this is why not only do we need analysis, but we need revolutionary organization. The result is death by poverty or by political violence that does not challenge the white colonial state that currently enforces laws to justify our exploitation as workers and oppression as Africans. There was a time, and it's still valid, the need to build a so-called cop watch where we have the ability to intervene. And right now, the police just ran up on this car, and they fucking with these Africans. And the city supposedly passed a law that makes it illegal for the police to stop somebody for what they call a low-level traffic offense. So now this is the thing, y'all. Because I know that the pigs, they want to, bait me and shit like that and get me, to pull me off my square. And this African is in their shit right now, and they got his license. Let's see what we got. This shit corny as shit, man. Shit corny, dog. Okay. If you go through that, then it's like, be out. You're not doing your job. But anyway, so we got this situation. I'm in the middle of Black No Cop Zone, broadcasting and shit. And the police want to fuck around and stop somebody. So I'm gonna leave that shit right the fuck there, bitch ass niggas. For real. That shit is about nothing but trying to fucking discredit the goddamn revolution. That shit is about trying to discredit the fucking revolution. That's all that shit is about. But any fucking way, bitch ass motherfuckers. Real shit. But anyway, SG Louisiana, the fate of those millions of Africans murdered in Rwanda and Congo, and those being killed in Ethiopia today, along with the 17,000 Africans in the US who were killed this year by gun violence, was determined by the circumstances created by colonialist capitalism, a system in which African workers worldwide are denied the right to control the wealth we produce and government to enforce economic policy we set for ourselves and all other forces internationally. And then, y'all, what we did capture on that particular struggle, pigs ain't had no mask on. And this is not to say that we some reformists that whose only demand is that the police wear masks before they shoot us, because obviously that makes no sense. We demand the immediate withdrawal of the occupying military force known as the police from the oppressed and exploited Black community. So I want to be clear about that. But in terms of tactics and strategies, what we have to do is engage in a process like death by 1,000 cuts, right? We have to stab away at them any way you possibly can. Any opportunity you have to undermine the state and to put them in a situation, even if it's around the question, why the fuck do they not have a mask on, stopping somebody, asking for their ID, spitting in their face and whatnot, right? In the midst of this Delta virus that they say is at an all-time high, in the midst of, the, what is it called, Omicron that they say just came out, and the vaccine doesn't even work for that, and they don't have a mask on as they are coercing these people to open up their window and speak to them. It's not even like it's in discussion that the people invite. The police impose their presence on the community. And I don't want to hear that bullshit, or Diop, you don't got a mask on right now. I don't got a mask on because I'm making a presentation to a camera. So I'm tired of that dumbass, unprincipled punk shit that some of these wannabe revolutionaries like to talk instead of dealing with the real question. Because while you all talking about why Diop don't got a mask on while they do Black No Cop Zone, because I'm not talking to nobody but a camera. But if the people engage me, I'm going to put my fucking mask on. But just like we engage in criticism inside the party, it's about the spirit of the goddamn mandate or the contradiction that you are responsible for creating. You have to make a dialectical criticism instead of this guerrilla, run up on them from the bushes, catch somebody. Chairman talk about it all the time. Where you want to, start playing, catch somebody making a mistake and shit, as opposed to being engaged in an honest struggle to advance the goals and objectives of the revolution. So while you worried about a Diop got a mask on, you don't got no kind of response for the police being in the people's face with no mask, right? So I don't respect y'all. Real shit. I'm talking about you punk ass motherfuckers that like to criticize from the goddamn sidelines and you don't even got no fucking program. You know what I'm saying? Real shit. And I went to war with the police on the same question. They took my fucking motor, my GSXR, a 1999 GSXR 600. And they took that shit because I challenged them on the question, why you don't got no mask? I got that shit on fucking video. And I appealed the ruling where they say I was riding the bike with no registration. And I appealed that ruling and they didn't even have the courage. They couldn't even show up. So they had to throw the case out. And right now I'm involved in the struggle to get reparations for the fucking motorcycle that the city of Philadelphia and they punk ass pigs stole from me. And if we had forces on the ground, then we would be putting them to work in terms of when you see the police in people's face with no mask, we gotta catch them in the act and struggle for the immediate with fucking immediate firing. That's part of what black community control the police is about. We say we want the power to hire, fire, train, and goddamn discipline, right? So that shit don't start when we got all the power, all of a sudden we're gonna start firing pigs. No, you start that shit right the fuck now. Because if you can determine, if you can expose that they violated your fucking rights, then you expose the fact that they don't got no business having a fucking gun in your community. You know what I'm saying? And that's, you know what I mean? And that's further evidence of why we demand black community control of the police. Real shit. Real fucking shit, man. We don't do this shit for likes. We do this so we can document concrete revolutionary analysis that even if Diop goes to jail or gets killed, you still can read and listen to this and move on that shit. It's not about fucking likes and shit. It's about documenting our position and being amongst the people. So if somebody wants to step to me on some real shit and want to criticize or ask questions, they have the ability, you know where I be at. Go on fucking Facebook, goddamn YouTube, and on 23rd and fucking Red. You know where I be at. So come see me. Real shit. The result is death by poverty or by political violence that does not challenge the white colonial state that currently enforces laws to justify our exploitation as workers and oppression as Africans. Rwanda, Congo, and all of Africa is abundant in natural resources. Quote, Africa produces 75% of the world's coltan, 35% of uranium, 66.33% of the world's manganese, 50% of gold, 90% of cobalt, 90% of platinum, etc., according to Gravitas News Network. Control of this mineral wealth is the basis for U.S. and all of white imperialist interests in Africa, as well as the proxy wars that it orchestrates. Because we materialists, we know that the U.S. government will not go out their way to start a war just because they want to see black people kill each other. There's a material basis for all the oppression that they impose on black people around the world. Because we got the riches, we got the wealth. Our homeland is the richest place on the planet Earth, as we just got finished displaying in that last quote. That's why they do what they do. And we have to understand that in terms of the strategic goal of our struggles. If we fucking fight, then we fight to take control over that manganese and cobalt and coltan and gold and platinum. That's what we fight for. Not just because we fuck the police. No, we have strategic objectives, reparations, control of the means of production. So that's what we're talking about, comrades. This is real important shit. Control of this mineral wealth is the basis for U.S. and all of white imperialist interests in Africa, as well as the proxy wars it orchestrates. Both the media and U.S. government officials try to hide the role the state plays in perpetuating colonial violence against African people. They hide that. They can't do it in their own name. You know what I'm saying? They gotta hide this shit. They can't tell you that they organizing proxy wars in Rwanda. So they blame it on the people, on the class and shit, right? On the workers. Listen. Or some, so-called corrupt, rogue government or some shit, dictator, they call it dictator, right? Like, where the fuck does dictator get goddamn M16s and shit, right? So anyway, colonial violence is necessary for white power to secure those resources. And in the US and other imperialist centers, colonial violence is necessary to maintain stability and separate Africans from the resources it steals from our homeland. Stability, y'all. They need stability. That's the whole shit. You got to understand. That's why they fucking banged them crackers that killed Ahmaud Arbery. Because they know that if they didn't convict those crackers, that you might tear their shit up. That's the only reason why they started. The fucking white people that killed Ahmaud Arbery, they said they was doing what y'all told us to do. We supposed to be doing a citizen's arrest. And if this was 100 years ago, they would have got away with this shit with no problem at all. But it's only because the black community has achieved an unprecedented capacity to fight back. Ferguson, Milwaukee, Baltimore, LA, Watts riots, all that shit. That's why they fucking banged them crackers that killed Ahmaud Arbery. You got to understand this shit. And stop letting these goddamn Uncle Toms and these fucking white people set the terms for how you move. That's why we say what we say, y'all. Real shit. All right. Both the media and U.S. government officials try to hide the role the state plays in perpetuating colonial violence against African people. Colonial violence is necessary in Africa for white power to secure those resources. And in the U.S. and other imperialist centers, colonial violence is necessary to maintain stability and separate Africans from the resources it steals from our homeland. Colonial violence necessitates a monopoly on violence by the white colonial state itself, which is why all response by the state to violence in the black community begins and ends with getting guns off the streets, right? While they don't ever talk about taking the guns away from the police, right? They talk about taking the guns away from the people. Like, but in the real world, where's the evidence that the people having the guns is the problem? Anyway, it depends on whose perspective you're looking at it from, right? If you're a landlord, if you own private property, then hell yeah, the police have a right to kill you, use lethal violence that can prevent you from going up in their window and taking your shit back. And that's a literal fact. The police have, in the state of Pennsylvania, the police have a legal right to use lethal force to stop somebody that's quote unquote in the act of committing a felony. They have the right to kill you if they catch you so-called committing a felony, even if that felony is something to taking a TV out of a goddamn shopping mall or whatever constitutes a felony, right? So, let's go, man. We gotta get this shit done. In fact, the state makes a point to call it gun violence, thus elevating the possession of guns by black people as the primary contradiction behind violence in today's society. Concretely, this is why the colonial capitalist state is moving around the question of violence in Philadelphia right now. Philadelphia Police Commissioner Danielle Outlaw promotes stricter conviction and sentencing as a means of taking guns off the street. She advocates, y'all know, well, we'll talk about Outlaw in a minute. She advocates for stricter prosecution and sentencing, adherence to the Uniform Firearms Act, right? She advocates for more aggressive, proactive policing, aka stop and frisk and other police tactics, which is why the police is on track to seize 6,000 guns this year. Again, how they get 6,000 guns off the street if they have not been stopping and frisking every African they see in the streets and say, what you got on you? That's the only way they can get 6,000 guns off the street, right? But there's no criticism, no self-criticism from the state for stop and frisk and stopping us and taking our guns away. They believe that this is going to deal with the question of violence, but we understand that they do this as a means to maintain their monopoly on violence and prevent the black community from being armed and therefore having the capacity to fight to overturn this parasitic relationship that this system has with African people around the world. This is facts. Uhuru Rashid, my comrade, she advocates, according to an article published in the Philadelphia Inquirer on March 30, 2021. Is that it, man? It's got a little bunched up, man. Gotta find this. Hold up. Got crazy. 2021. Here we go. Quote, in 2021, police are making arrests for carrying an illegal gun on a pace nearly 3 times that of 2017, according to an Inquirer analysis of police data in 8 years of court dockets, unquote. So they've been stopping and frisking Africans 3 times as much since 2017. And you know why? Because of George Floyd rebellion, the resistance. This has made it necessary for the state to increase intensify its repression of the black community and make sure this shit don't get out of hand. It's one thing for the white kids to protest downtown, but it's a whole other ball game when the African working class and the most oppressed sectors of our community start really getting to some real shit. And so they take a preemptive approach to that question by stopping frisk and stopping you and taking your guns and locking you up for having one, etc. The increased pace of gun arrests could not be possible without intensified stop and frisk or coerced police interaction with black people. Danielle Outlaw was installed by Philadelphia Mayor Jim Kenney as a strategy of neo-colonialism or white power in blackface to intensify and disguise police repression of the African community. Her installment also represented a strategy of counter-insurgency in Philadelphia, a city in which our fucking movement, successfully drove Outlaw's predecessor, Charles Ramsey, out of the city. We drove Charles Ramsey out of the city of Philadelphia through ongoing protests and other tactics of resistance. We made it impossible for them to keep Ramsey in place without there being instability. So they bring in this new force from Portland, Oregon, by way of Oakland, California, Danielle Outlaw, who's supposed to, let's talk. Today, Outlaw is not unlike many police commissioners around the country in that she is confronted with the contradiction of disguising her political sameness with her predecessor while effectively putting down black resistance that is rapidly growing today. This is important, y'all, because this is Danielle Outlaw's responsibility. On one side, she got to prove that she not like Charles Ramsey. She not going to keep on doing the pig shit that we did not like about, quote unquote, Charles Ramsey on one side. But also at the same time, she has to prevent the African community from achieving the capacity to fight. She has to continue the work of Charles Ramsey without revealing the fact that she's doing so. And that's why her entire look, Charles Ramsey, this old guy, he's African, but that's a whole other question. He's older, a man, all this shit. In fact, I think he left in part, his stated excuse has something to do with subjective relationships with women and stuff. So, he's this guy that's problematic. And then here comes Danielle Outlaw to, a woman's touch, right? And then she's supposed to, set things on the right track. But as you can clearly see, Danielle's Outlaw program ain't no different from fucking Charles Ramsey. She's the one that's calling for more feds to be in your community. I just read it. She's the one saying we got to work with our partners in the federal, I didn't read that part yet. I'm going to read it in a minute. Yeah, so listen, y'all. Outlaw came in during the aftermath of Ferguson in 2014 and Freddie Gray in 2015, and a series of struggles and political campaigns waged by various forces within the Black liberation movement here. For the system, Outlaw was to be the one to give the appearance that the police department has been reformed from the top down, while also putting into place measures that would ensure that the Black resistance did not achieve the capacity to wage armed struggle. This need informs Outlaw's current position on guns and violence in the Black community. During an October 6, 2021 interview on Fox 29's morning news show, Outlaw said, quote, we, and she's talking about herself and the DA, Larry Krasner, she said, we differ there on how people carrying illegal firearms should be prosecuted, unquote. And she says, quote, when I talk about partnership with our federal partners, the ATF, DEA, FBI, this is Danielle Outlaw talking. They basically take data that we provide them that say, look, these are our hottest spots. We need you to hunker down and put resources here. We need you to prioritize these cases. So Danielle, she's not even hiding the shit. She's pushing for federal police forces to occupy our community alongside the regular Philadelphia pigs in the so-called hottest spots. And we say that these so-called hottest spots are the spots where Black community control of the police is needed the most. In fact, that's where our base needs to be established, and where if there's any reform to take place around the police question, it should be the immediate withdrawal of all police forces from what she characterized as the hottest spots, because clearly the police make it hotter, right? And in fact, the police is responsible for the heat, because well, we can talk about it, y'all. Yeah, man, but you gotta understand this shit, man. And we're gonna get to the final point real soon in terms of what must be done. I know y'all say, I hear you, that sounds good, but what will you do? We're gonna talk about what to do. Prioritization of quote unquote these cases necessitates police occupation of the territory in which the cases occur. In the real world, the prioritization of the cases by her federal partners translates into the stop and frisk and other pig shit that resulted in the seizure of nearly 6,000 guns this year. Outlaw stands for class peace, peace on the plantation, and has not attempted to hide her loyalty to the colonial state which shares this vision. Quote, if there's nothing to, this is her talking again, if there's nothing to deter folks, if there's no consequence where people believe if I do this, this is going to happen, then there's no incentive to not carry a gun illegally, quite frankly. This is what she said. Again, this vision of class peace rests primarily on disarming black people. Nothing Outlaw says criticizes the system that inflicts brutality, terror, and violence on black people daily. Nor does she call for Africans to resist against this system and its terror with our guns. The objective of the colonial state that includes Danielle Outlaw is to disarm the black population. And the district attorney, Larry Krasner, seeks class peace as well, to go through ideological influence over Africans rather than intensified police activity. Because this is Krasner, we'll talk. So in an article in the Philadelphia Inquirer, it stated about Krasner, quote, in the midst of a contested re-election race, Krasner said the city's focus instead should be on other issues, the long-standing structural problems that drive people toward picking up a gun, such as the underfunded schools, government neglect of impoverished neighborhoods, and a bloated justice system that has targeted poor and black and brown residents. See, but Krasner, he cannot indict colonialism. He can't say that the reason why the schools ain't shit is, and I don't care how much money the schools got, you know, because they still gonna teach you that you was a slave and you should be a good slave today. The school's still gonna impose other capitalist colonialist philosophy on your brain. So I don't care how much money the schools got. That's not the question. Unless the school is teaching a slave how to destroy the system of slavery, then I don't care about funding the goddamn school system. And that's real talk. And the same thing goes for so-called negligence on the part of the government on certain areas. And basically, what Krasner's saying is that white power, the U.S. government, is taking the wrong approach to maintaining class peace, to keeping Africans and the slaves in check. That's essentially what he's about. Krasner, I don't care what kind of cases I got. I don't give a fuck about some threat of going to jail and shit. This is real shit. I say this shit in jail too. The fact is that Krasner, he's just critical of the tactic of simply prosecuting heavily and sending the people to jail a little bit longer, etc. He said the way that you keep this parasitic system together is by, you know, investing more in the schools that simply to teach the Negroes how to be calm and peaceful. That's it. That's all Krasner represents. So in the final analysis, he's one head of a two-headed monster, and he shares the other one with fucking Danielle Outlaw. And that's real talk. And that's not, well, you know, so anyway, this statement reflects Krasner's opposition to the African community being armed and self-determined. And although they present themselves publicly as being at odds, they clearly unite on the question of keeping guns out of the hands of black people. At the end of the day, Krasner and Outlaw represent two heads of the same beast. Objectively, they stand on the same side of the question of whether black people should be free. And for how can a truly free and independent people be unarmed, right? Tell George Washington to lay down his guns, right? Ain't nobody saying that George Washington and them was wrong for fighting for their so-called independence, right? Or anybody else, but all of a sudden black people We supposed to sacrifice our independence, our dignity, and our guns? Fuck out of here, man. And so if you're not coming with that kind of discussion, then you don't got no rap for me, and you shouldn't have no rap for the people either. Anyway, so an article, so District Attorney Larry Krasner seeks class peace as well, though through ideological influence over Africans rather than intensified police activity. An article in the Philadelphia Inquirer states, quote, in the midst of a contested re-election, race, Krasner said that the city's focus should instead be on other issues. I read that part. This statement reflects Krasner's opposition to the African community being armed. And although they present themselves publicly as being at odds with each other, they clearly unite on the question of keeping guns out of the hands of Black people. At the end of the day, Krasner and Outlaw represent two heads of the same beast. Objectively, they stand on the same side of the question of whether Black people should be free. For how can a truly free and independent people be unarmed? Part of why Outlaw and Krasner get away with this good cop, bad cop routine is due to the bourgeoisie's elevation of the gun or gun violence as a primary contradiction in society, as opposed to the social system itself and the political role that guns play within it. We're not opposed to guns. We are opposed, just like we're not opposed to violence. We are opposed to reactionary violence. We are opposed to violence that is used to perpetuate the system of slavery, colonialism, and oppression and exploitation of working people. That's what we opposed to. But we stand for violence to liberate oppressed people. The ideological and political influence of the colonial capitalist state extends beyond the police commissioner and district attorney, however, both of whom directly represent the state itself. The national and class enemies of the African working class include the white left and the African petty bourgeoisie, or middle class. These social forces are especially disdainful, meaning they hate the African working class because their status in colonial capitalist system depends on our oppression and exploitation. So in all of this discussion about violence in the city, both the petty bourgeoisie and white left calls on the state or city hall to intervene, right? That's what they all, you turn on the news, if there's any discussion about stopping the violence, these stop the violence cats, they always going down to the goddamn mayor's office. Like, you know, they calling on the government to intervene, which means you calling the police. But anyway, so in all this discussion about violence, to intervene as opposed to demanding self-determination for African people, a number of protests by these forces have been held at the footsteps of the mayor's office, demanding that he, quote unquote, do something. There have been a number of organizations established to carry out the line of police containment in response to homicides in the city. Among them is an organization called Operation Save Our City. The activities of Operation Save Our City are documented in this 2019 article on WHYY.org. Quote, with body bags lining the sidewalk outside Philadelphia police headquarters, anti-violence activists and relatives of murder victims protested Philadelphia's high rate of unsolved homicide cases. For 3 days this week, they protested that last year, only 44% of Philadelphia homicides were solved. That is better than in 2017, but the clearance rate is still below the national average of 60%, according to the FBI. In 2012, Ros Pichardo's brother was murdered. That case is still unsolved. Pichardo, who's a founder of victims advocate organization Operation Save Our City, says the protest is calling for a revamped homicide unit, stricter gun laws, and harsher penalties for gun-related crimes. So that's what these Stop the Violence cats is really, they just calling for the state to beef up and to do more to repress the African population. Quote, detectives, detectives need to get to the crime scene immediately to get evidence. They need to speak to witnesses immediately to get statements, and they need to be more passionate about their job to want to close a case, as Spinoza said. The colonial state, this is us talking now, the colonial state works with these forces because of their perceived credibility as being a part of the community. So the police, the state, they put these types of forces forward in the media, you know what I'm saying? Because if the police say this themselves, then you be less likely to accept all of it. But when they get somebody that comes from your neighborhood to say it, then you are more susceptible to the bullshit. And this is why we have to have revolutionary organization to intervene and to expose even the sellouts in our ranks so that the masses are never misled, right? So, the colonial state works with these forces because of their perceived credibility as being part of the community, connected to the people. But their only role is to validate the state. And in doing so, they obscure the true role of the state in society and the monopoly it has over violence. Therefore, it is appropriate that we dedicate some time to addressing or understanding the question of violence in colonial capitalist society. There are only two forms of violence, y'all: revolutionary violence and reactionary violence. Revolutionary violence is violence that comes up from the oppressed against the state, and reactionary for the purpose of liberation. Reactionary violence is violence that is designed to protect the state and protect the system of colonialism while attacking the oppressed. And when forces among the oppressed ourselves participate in reactionary violence against each other, we call that horizontal violence, because they call it black on black violence. But when you got oppressed and exploited African workers shooting each other, they are engaging in reactionary violence. But there's a difference between the reactionary violence or horizontal violence that is waged by the people against each other, and the reactionary violence that comes straight from the state, which has a material interest in imposing violence on the entire African community. So when forces among the oppressed participate in reactionary violence against each other, we call it horizontal violence. We condemn horizontal violence as much as we condemn police violence itself. However, unlike the troops of the colonial state, African workers who shoot each other do not have the power to oppress each other unless they are tied to the colonial state itself. And there are paid confidential informants and other operatives of every police department in the country who get paid to frame up Africans, to kill Africans, and to create other forms of instability in the black community in a number of different ways. For this reason, we do not respond to reactionary horizontal violence in the same way that we respond to police brutality and other state-sponsored violence. Reactionary violence from the state will only end when the colonial state is physically destroyed, while horizontal violence among the people can only be resolved through political education and political persuasion, reasoning with the people, to help the people understand their material interests and how it is not in your material interest to engage in horizontal violence. You can't convince the police to stop killing us. Yes. You can publish that public. That's nice. We're gonna have it passing out next week. We're working on that. Thank you, sister. If you want, yeah. Here's the spin, sister. This is the source right here. That's the source.
Yeah, I'm saying listening to you.
Yeah, it's important. Yeah.
Read that book from.
Yeah. All right. Hold on. Thank you. So while horizontal violence amongst the people can only be resolved through political education and political persuasion, reasoning with the people. In order for that to occur, the entire oppressed African population must unite under revolutionary organization, and in doing so, establish protocols for the community to adhere to that that serves to expose agents of the colonial state and prevent the state from functioning in the community itself. So that's the value of organization. And because when you in organization and when the community is organized, then we therefore have the ability to establish our own laws and protocols. So now if somebody breaks ranks and disobeys or commits infractions on these laws and protocol, then you can there more clearly expose and give a more clear definition of what kind of force you're dealing with. And so that's the value of criticism and self-criticism, which requires organization and political education. And that's what we're struggling for. And this will happen when we have successfully built a social movement for Black community control of police. One of the strategic tasks of which is to point all African-controlled guns at the colonial state. That's why we say point your guns at the state. And colonial violence, point your guns at the state. Point number 3 of blackisbackcoalition.org, 19-point platform for Black political self-determination states. Quote, we demand Black community control of the police. This is our organization's platform. This is what we demand. We demand Black community control of the police, the immediate withdrawal of all domestic military occupation forces from Black communities. This democratic demand assumes the ability of Black people to mobilize for our own security and to redefine the role of the police so that it no longer functions as an agency imposed on us from the outside. BCCP is more than just a demand. It is a political strategy to win power in the hands of the African working class. So what must be done? So this is where the final part of today's discussion, where we're going to basically just say how we got to move coming out of this discussion. So at the historic National Conference on Black Community Control of Police, held April 2015 in Ferguson, Missouri, blackisbackcoalition.org resolved to carry out the following strategy to achieve real Black power over the armed security forces in our community. And those main 3 objectives are: 1, the city council resolution and or ballot initiative to impose a new policy on how policing and public safety is controlled in the most oppressed sectors of our community. This reform would result in a Black community control of police commission that is independent and democratically governed by the community it serves. It would have power to hire, fire, set training standards, and discipline the gun-wielding security forces in our communities. So, and city council has the ability to unite with this or not. And if they unite with it, they have the ability to actually put it on a ballot for general election so that it will become the law in any given city where we're doing this. So part of what we have to do is struggle with your local city council, but not only that, but engage in the struggle in the process of the ballot initiative, where we can actually get petitions signed that say the people want this law to be on the ballot to determine if it should be actually adopted as law. And as we win that type of support for the ballot initiative on the electoral front, for every person that signs the petition, they should be seen as potential recruits into the Black community control of police security force and structure. And when we say security force, we don't just mean that in the sense of guns and kung fu, but security also entails food, clothes, and shelter. And essentially because you can die from lack of those things, right? So security is more than just protection against certain forms or traditionally recognized forms of violence, but real security means that we have the capacity to control how we live, how we eat, how we clothe ourselves, etc. And so our task is to transform our brothers and sisters in the streets and in the community into soldiers to advance that task from revolution, from democracy from above and revolution from above, from below. And there's no better time. We say keep fighting. We say keep fucking fighting. That's what they're trying to stop more than anything. And there's no reason why we should stop what we was doing in May 2020 when we stood up for George Floyd and when we stood up for Freddie Gray and when we stood up for Mike Brown. There's no reason to stop. And that's why we say strike at will. And even as we engage in that ongoing resistance and build our capacity to create problems for the state, create problems for the police, everything from struggles around put your fucking mask on, pig, to the question of illegal stops and frisks and the pigs that have clearly violated your rights when they stop you with no probable cause, reasonable suspicion, they should be fired. And every single struggle that we wage and win around these questions builds up the fighting capacity to build and construct real black community control of the police. That's how it works. There's no better time to start, and there's never a time we should stop. Number 2, know your rights, legal and political self-defense program. Distribution of a know your rights card that arms the people with an understanding of their legal rights when encountered by the police. This education provides the basis for community fight back in response to police who violate their own protocol. 3, petition drive to the police to express concrete unity with the aim of BCCP. So last thing I want to say, and this is what we're talking about. If you're really interested in that, tap in. Of course, you here right now, hashtag Black No Cop Zone, and join the Black Community Control Police at blackisbackcoalition.org. But the last thing I want to say, because I was disturbed at the African's response when I, began to record the pigs fucking with him in his car, and he was like, chill, bro, chill, bro. And I get that sometimes. And when I say I get that, not meaning I understand it, meaning that, that is a response that does happen from time to time. And his response may be informed by the fact that I have recorded myself being stopped by the pigs, typically in these situations in the white community where it ain't nobody fucking around but me and the fucking cop. And my objective is not to get into an argument with the pig and to have the type of stance that I had when I was amongst the people, because it ain't gonna be no fucking black community control and police struggle made and on fucking 4th and Brown. And for those of you in Philly, you know what the fuck that is. That's white people. And so if the pig stopped me on 4th and Brown, I'm going to just try to get out of that situation. He said, oh, you got to have tags on your fucking, here go my tags in my bag, they fell off. And keep it fucking moving. I'm not going to get into a goddamn argument and the same type of political struggle that I would on 23rd and Ridge, because the power, the basis of my stance, the basis of my strength is not myself, like I'm motherfucking Batman or some kind of superhero, but it's in the people. The people back the pigs down. Individuals don't back the pigs down. The people back the pigs down. And there have been situations like when they took my bike where I did take a stand, even when it wasn't a whole lot of people around, but I took that stand and I recorded it because I wanted to create a certain type of precedence and ability to spread it out, to say, put it on a flyer. And I put that shit on a fucking flyer. And we passed that motherfucker out. And, I did that strategically so that I could say to the entire community, this is what happened when I was up Broad and Godfrey. The pigs stopped me with no mask on. And when I challenged them on it, they said they're going to take my bike. So the point is that just because, and, there's such a thing as a tactic of nonviolence, not a philosophy of nonviolence, but nonviolence as a tactic, because you fight when you know you can win. You don't fight just like you don't let the pig set the terms for when the fucking struggle go down. You the one that decide when you gonna strike, and that's why we say that the new arena for African resistance is not downtown. It's in the oppressed and exploited African colony of Bridge Ave and shit, all throughout North Philly and the most oppressed sectors of our community where the people know the terrain. And therefore, you can create the conditions for how you fight, as opposed to being the one that they got the drop on. Y'all know what I'm talking about. So I just want to address that shit, because the brother is sad. It's unfortunate that, that was his response, but it is possible that he misunderstood the Facebook broadcast that I made a couple weeks ago, where I was quote unquote sheepish and I said no doubt, whatever, and he kept it fucking moving. And I need to put a caption on that struggle, that particular altercation, so that people can understand it in a better context. But anyway, the fact of the matter is that we've been out here. Y'all know our predicate. This black community control of the police. Y'all know what we about. Well, y'all. We'll see you next week.